Hello, everybody. I'm honored today to be accompanied by a professor in Amsterdam. His name is Buijs, and it's for us. It's not necessarily spelled the way it sounds. He will maybe introduce himself a little bit, but my understanding he's a professor of social studies or social science, as well as gender issues, and he's at the University of Amsterdam. So, Lawrence, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And what has been on your mind and on your plate in universe lately?
Right. So my name is Buijs, and I teach in the interdisciplinary social science department of the University of Amsterdam. And it's basically part of the Social Science Institute. So we have political science, anthropology, sociology, and I teach and also do research in these institutions. I've been doing that already for a long time. I really see myself as a child of the University of Amsterdam. I really stand also in the tradition of the University of Amsterdam, in the social scientific tradition. And yeah, so basically, recently I have been part of a huge controversy on our campus that also reached national and international news because I spoke out against woke culture. And I also wrote an opinion article in the university newspaper explaining how woke culture is, in my view, a direct threat to academic freedom and to the quality of education and to the quality of research. Yeah, so I've also expressed my concern. I've given some examples, and next to that, I also went to the official whistleblower procedure, which is a procedure covered by Dutch national law which protects me as a whistleblower. I handed in a whistleblower report to the central board of the university, basically saying this is going totally wrong. We need to have action from a central level to prevent this whole institution from, yeah, collapsing, at least in terms of academic freedom.
And since universities love academic freedom, since at least in the United States, the tenure system, which sounds like 10 years, often people are there much longer. So, I have some experience with professors. I hang out with some professors. Oddly enough, though, the tenure system has not necessarily produced what it was intended for, which is freedom of expression. Supposedly, you should be able to say what you want without repercussions or ramifications for your career. But since we all love, free speech, and we all understand that there's discourse is the nature of the university and the college. Frankly, it's the word college, which means to read together. And anyway, I'm being somewhat sarcastic here. How did things play out?
Yeah, so basically, like what happened is 2 years ago when COVID, when the pandemic started, I became critical on the vaccination technology and also on the policy measures that were undertaken by the Dutch government. And I approached this from my discipline, science and technology studies. I'm an expert in especially in the thought of French philosopher Bruno Latour, who thought a lot about the social and political implications of technology. So I thought about this in my classes, and I also started to speak out from a Latourian perspective, critically on COVID, the policy measures, and the vaccination technology. And that was the first time when I started to notice, okay, this is absolutely impossible to do because I get so much heat and so much personal attacks that this is a direct threat for my career. Especially at the time, I got a lot of critique from my colleagues, not so much from my students. My students actually liked it, that I tried to open up the debate a little bit and to have some critical perspective on the measures. But from my institution, this did not play out well. So I also got an official warning from my manager, and so that I was crossing the line, that I am now too much involved in science denial, and that this is dangerous, that I speak out, and this is against the values of the university. And so I really got top down disciplined to silence me, and I didn't like that at all. And I also felt that if I do not adhere and do not obey, then I get into trouble. So that was not nice. And then also, I'm a researcher already for a long time on anti-gay violence, on homophobic violence here in Amsterdam, and we see for a long time already an overrepresentation in my data of perpetrators of Dutch Moroccan boys.
Hmm.
And this is a sensitive topic in Holland because this concerns the discussion about the multicultural society and the role of Islam in Holland. And I'm a left wing person and I'm a progressive person, and I've always spoken out against Islamophobia in Holland. Yeah, so I also have also prevented that my data are abused for Islamophobic politics. At the same time, I think my data also legitimize severe critique on Islam, and especially the homophobic tendencies in the Muslim community in Amsterdam. And that is very hard to address that part of the story, because I often felt that my colleagues were basically accusing me of being too nationalistic, too much far right, too much on the wrong side. Well, in fact, I think it's very important to address these issues properly and freely. So there I also noticed a lot of problems, and I'm setting up a research at this moment, also in a cooperation with the University of Berlin. And that is very hard to do because of the severe criticism and the severe backlash. Because I researched, because of the research question that I posed, which is what is also the role of religion and Islam in the motives of the perpetrators of homophobic violence in Amsterdam. And then there's another issue, a third issue, and that is that I've been working for 3 years on the concept of androgyny. I am into gender and sexuality. And I think the concept of androgyny is very interesting. I've been researching it interdisciplinary from a biological, sociological, psychological perspective. And basically, from this research, I became more and more critical on a hype that is going on at this moment in Holland, which is the non-binary gender identity. That more and more of my students, but also young people throughout the country in secondary schools, decide to distance themselves from what I call their primary gender identity. So from the core feeling, I'm a man or I'm a woman. This happens without consultations of professionals. This is facilitated by schools, by policies, by diversity policies. And I was concerned by that because I think it's not a scientifically properly researched concept, non-binary. It lacks solid scientific foundation,
To say the least.
to say the least. I'm a big supporter of the trans community, and I think that the transgender community in itself has at this moment a lot of problems with the concept of gender dysphoria, which there is a lot of debate about. Like, so there's also people being diagnosed with gender dysphoria that later regret their transition. So I think it's important now to look carefully. How do we deal with people that are unhappy with their sex, with the primary gender identity? We should not facilitate it too quickly to have them transition or to take hormones, but also take into account biological, neurological, psychological aspects. Basically, this has been my point. And I also got a lot of heat from that, especially from my students who started a petition against me, who accused me of homophobia, of transphobia, who have been demanding for basically my departure and for apologies of the university. And here also I've seen that the university and my direct manager, they choose sides for these students complaining because they say, oh, diversity policy, everybody should feel protected here and should feel happy and should feel safe. And Laurens is threatening this safety. So my director even distanced herself from my work. And she doesn't even know my work. She's not an expert in gender and sexuality. She doesn't know my arguments, but only purely based on what I call a sort of a decency police, I am being cancelled. Yeah. And this is for me why it reached a lot of the news in Holland, is that I myself am. I have been a big supporter of diversity policy. I am a left-wing progressive person. I am an LGBTI activist. I've been to the Black Lives Matter manifestations here in Amsterdam. I support all that, but for me it goes too far. So I come from within the left, and I drew the line. I say this is now also a threat for all of us. And I think it's time now that also within the community and within the social science department and within the left, within the progressive left, we speak out against it, because this is now a direct threat for academic freedom.
So there's a lot to unpack there. I'm just going to maybe try to tease out one thread, which is there's an old expression, when liberal pieties collide, and I hope that translates for you. It's the fact that that there are oftentimes ideas on the progressive left, and they may be inimical to each other. It's kind of like magnets. Magnets align in a certain way, and when you hold them the wrong way, they fly away. So in what you just recently said, you were talking about what I'm hearing is similar to the situation in England. There was kind of a Pakistani Muslim grooming gang in Rotherham. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And the police kept it under wraps for long periods of time because they didn't want to state the obvious that girls were being trapped and set up to prostitution, and not Pakistani girls. They were not going in-house, as it were. They weren't going in faith. They were finding girls who were more available and so forth. And so a lot of that was hidden. So to get to the question I have is, on the left, there's all this, say freedom of choosing and identity and all this kind of sexual wash. And at the same time, there's treating Islam as a kind of a protected class. At some point, I don't think it's a mystery that within kind of essential Islam, that all these gender theories are, say, hyper anathema, and in places like Iran, Saudi, whatnot, are punishable by death, or worse, torture and then death. Where does any of this come up? Does the kind of the essential fracture, the internal fracture, like you drop an ice cube and it's broken inside, does any of this come out? That there's some of this irony that at the one side that everyone's kind of protecting Islam, at the other side they're doing theories and so forth that are inimical to. And I'm wondering whether that kind of makes what we call strange bedfellows politically. Have you found kind of different alignments based on your thoughts?
Yeah, so I see in many ways, this is also one of my major points that I made in my critique against woke. I think it's in many ways a very paradoxical ideology. So when it comes to gender, it claims to strive for a society beyond man and woman and beyond all the prejudices, but it really focuses a lot on the distinction between men and women and pronouns, and it also almost becomes an obsession. And I also see the same with, for example, in Holland. I come from a left-wing atheist, secular tradition. Also, my family is from that tradition. I've learned from a very young age that critique on religion is the most progressive thing you can do, a critique against organized, institutionalized religion. So, and I always saw on television brave people breaking down and attacking institutionalized religion. So when I now try to do the same, I think that it is important to do that against Christianity, but also absolutely against Islam, because I think it's important to have that critique. Then you're very quickly, by the same left, accused of Islamophobia. So something has happened there, that this sort of focus on decency within the progressive left has ironically, paradoxically, alienated the left from its own positions, from its own background. I see that very clearly here in Holland.
Do you see all of this coming out? Well, I mean, we've had COVID. We have some of the themes you're talking about, these kind of gender issues, confusion, so forth. And then there's kind of a threat of Islam. And potentially a threat of Islam. My understanding is that the most common first name for boys in the European continent is Muhammad, country by country. Certainly in say Western Europe, so forth. Is that the case in the Netherlands? And how does this all play out? What what do you, I don't know if you have any insight to how this is looked upon in Islamic communities. Are people assimilating to kind of the predominant Dutch culture? Are they maintaining their own culture, or is it a combination? How do you see all this playing out? And is this, kind of like, kind of, as they work on the atomic bomb, is this kind of a proton collider?
Yeah. So it is a big problem here in Holland, this integration of the Muslim community. There's Muslims in Holland from a range of different countries. There's a big Moroccan and Turkish community. There's also now, of course, Afghan and Syrian and other Middle Eastern countries. And we have had very severe societal problems with this, and also very intense debates. And what we see time and time happening is that basically the ones that dare to speak out really with force and bravery against the problems that we see with Islam in Holland are people from the populist right, from the new right-wing movements. And so what we see time and time again is that sort of the liberal, often left-wing progressive establishment doesn't really dare to speak out like that, and then accuses the other party of Islamophobia. So we really see this polarized position where it's very difficult to have attention for these problems in Dutch society with the integration of Islam without being accused of being far right. And this often escalates. And of course, there is also in Holland, this is also then I'm worried about, there is also Islamophobia, especially since 9/11. There's very quickly this association between Muslims and terrorists. And there can be very, harsh judgment back and forth. So there is a problem there. But what's interesting about the Dutch situation is that we have had a lot of attention on, basically 9/11 made a lot of Dutch people think about what are our cultural values, what is the core of Dutch society that we also need to protect in this globalized world. And basically, we have had some politicians who have done some interesting work on that, and also historians. And what is very quickly seen in Holland as sort of the crown jewels of Dutch culture is progressive values when it comes to sexuality and gender also. We have had a very intense sexual revolution in Holland in the 1960s and 70s. It had a severe impact not only on the cities and the urban centers of Holland, but it also made big waves to the people in the countryside. So this really transformed the Netherlands. There's this tradition of tolerance, of openness, of democracy, of free speech. And so in the discussions about what is now the core of Dutch culture, sexuality and openness, acceptance of homosexuality is very often mentioned.
Right. So I'm going to cut you off for a second. I apologize. But you're making some ideas swirl in my head. And I just want to release some of them. It seems that first of all, as a total side note, the word phobia, or the suffix phobia, I think is always a misapplication, because that's fear of, and I don't think these things are necessarily fear of homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia. I think there's some realm of reasonable discussion, and conversely, I think there's the fair amount of freedom phobia, if we're going to use that same term, against, or Lawrence phobia, or Buijs phobia. That's all inimical to the whole tolerance project. It seems to me that tolerance, and a lot of these things are Potemkin villages. They are facades that announce something, and then they put all kinds of fences and just the way we were herded during COVID. We had arrows in the supermarket. We had places you couldn't go. We had screens. There was all kinds of delineation within our literal pathways. But it seems as if there's the same thing happening in philosophical and colloquial pathways within colleges and universities and public square, with certain, kind of to mix a religion here, Hinduist sacred cows. There's certain things you can't touch, certain places you can't go. Yeah. And they seem to be kind of forcing people down a certain pathway, which I think is a reasonable thing to question. I'll just layer one thing in. that the far right connotes something different in the United States, I think, versus the European continent. Here, to be an American is more of a concept. We've always allowed people from all different places to be American if they were interested in adopting, some of the premises and precepts and principles of what it is at any given time to be American. Usually, a matter of freedom, responsibility, making your own way, and so forth. Whereas, the far right in Europe, from my understanding, has much more to do with soil, heredity, and ethnicity. And so, to be Dutch is to be Dutch. To be Polish to be Polish, and so the far right has a much longer kind of ethno cultural history. And it seems as if partially people are abandoning that as far as the Netherlands and the Dutch go, because there's the Dutch West Indies, there's Dutch East Indies. There were all kinds of colonial aspects of the Netherlands, and there's kind of a huge wealth, literal and figurative wealth, that was brought to the Netherlands over time. And it seems to be that to distill that down into we just want to do funky stuff sexually, I think is reductionist. And anyway, so that just to unpack that, where do you see kind of freedom as part of this, and are there ways in which freedom is part of, say, your Dutch cultural heritage, or what I was trying to say, your Dutch cultural. Anyway, so where does that leave you? Does that leave you on the far left? Does it put you on the far right? Are you in the far middle? Is there such a thing?
So what I have come to realize is that when it comes to my activism, I've always been very strongly against the far right in Holland. And the past couple of years, I've started to appreciate it more. I also think the concept of the far right is problematic. I now call it the new right. And there is, I'm still left wing, and that won't change. But I have started to appreciate, with my own naivety disappearing, about the direct threat of freedom that we have in Holland from all sides. It's not only from Islam, it's from many sides, also from within. Yeah. But there is definitely also this Islam part. And I think, well, they at least have been fighting. But what my view is, like, I am a strong supporter of the multicultural society. What my objection is with the new right is that they often idealize Holland when it used to be, before multiculturalism, the white society. And I, as a gay man, know as no other that also diversity and space for differences has benefited me hugely. Yeah, and also that the multicultural society has many enriching parts of Dutch society. But what I think is the problem of the left in Holland is that we are not strict enough on what we demand, for example, from immigrants. And I think we can learn that from the right. So I am not, like the right often says, Holland is Holland, Islam doesn't fit here, they should leave. And I am not like that. I think Islam can be, in many aspects, a beautiful religion and a beautiful addition to Dutch culture and society. Welcome. But, and then really be strict, like you are here in the Netherlands. These are our norms and values. There is a certain threshold where you have to integrate, that you have to accept.
Right. So this is a little bit the French model in a sense.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure it's all working out as a model.
No.
Certainly the pathways don't work backwards. My friends, if things are going well and it's not a lockdown, they always think about where they're going to travel next. We want to go to Italy. We want to go to Thailand. We want to. They never mention, Iran. They never mention, Yemen. They never mention Sudan. They never mention Somalia and so forth. A lot of the places that from which people are coming to Europe are particular societies, and some of them have various increased degrees of say religious control and or repression. Read it as you will. And so I'm not sure it necessarily is doing a service to those immigrants per se. If people withdraw from a reasonable criticism of what is allowable in that particular country. If somebody goes a lateral transit, say from Somalia, Somalia's three. It's not necessarily a full operated country, or maybe it's three of them or five of them, whatever. But if somebody makes a lateral transfer from Saudi Arabia to Yemen, and again, that's who knows what Yemen is, but leaving those things aside, that's one thing. So you've gone from, say, Islamic Republic to Islamic Republic. But if you go from Islamic Republic to Germany, England, France, whatever, presumably you are moving to those places with those cultures implicit and intact. And part of the reason you went there is that things have worked out economically and in terms of personal comforts and so forth, and liberties, and freedom to do what you want and act religiously or not.
Yeah.
And it seems inimical and in a sense a disservice to the immigrants per se if you abandon those principles from which they were operating on their arrival. So here's the question. So I apologize for the intro, but the question I would have is: Are there have you noticed voices within, say, from Dutch Islam that are in agreement with you, and are people putting the same kind of inquiry and self insight or critical process or whatever to some of the apparatuses which brought them there, and whether whither they want the Netherlands to go and or these other countries, and whether they are comfortable with a lot of these transpositions, no pun intended, of sexuality and gender issues.
Yeah. So it's difficult. It's hard to find support there, but it is there. So I sometimes visit mosques, and I try to involve myself wherever I can in the Amsterdam Muslim community. And one thing that I notice is that what a lot of these Muslims realize is that from the Dutch government, as it is now institutionalized, and the mainstream power structures in Dutch society, they will never be really their friends. They start to realize now more and more that even if these politicians speak out for them, it is more in an instrumental way and not from a genuine concern with the multicultural society or their well-being. And so basically what I see is that there is this idea among some Dutch Muslims here in Amsterdam: okay, so maybe we will have to form a new alliance with other minorities and groups that don't fit in society, that are unhappy with the government structures. And then even if there is weird gay people or feminist women there, yeah, maybe these are better allies for us than the mainstream power structure. So this is something that I find myself that opens sometimes opportunities for new alliances. Yeah. Okay, they also know that they need new allies, they need new coalitions, and from that there's an opportunity. But that opportunity really needs to be taken very seriously and can be very easily sort of wasted if they feel that, for example, in my view, they very quickly feel when you don't set your own interests, when you're a weak negotiator, they feel it and they abuse it, and I think it's rightly so. So there again, I see we from the left have to really learn how to, if we want to build coalitions with them, how to be very strict on the things that we value, and to have very serious talks with Muslim communities in Holland. For example, I research homophobic violence in Amsterdam. I see time and time again these Moroccan boys being one of the major groups in my perpetrator.
So are these Moroccan boys on the far right?
No,
as the left would call it.
Yeah, there you go. That's an interesting question. But so what I see is that these boys, they are often there is similarities between me and my political movement with them. They are dissatisfied with Dutch society. They don't think that people take them seriously. They are critical on Western imperialism and on the role of the West in the Middle East. That all fits my left-wing agenda, but where it stops is I am against hatred of the West. And this is something that I often see a little bit too much. There's also hatred towards the West, hatred towards the freedom for women, hatred towards the freedom for homosexuality in Holland. And then I think, yeah, this is not negotiable. And so here we have to draw a very clear line. And yes, we can form a coalition, but you have to drop these radical ideas. Yeah. And here I see often the left saying, yeah, but they come where they come from. We should be compassionate for that and slowly talk about it and allow it a little bit. And then I think, yeah, that space, they abuse it to stay the way they are.
Right. So just numerically, I mean, we live in a moment. I have been unable to make time go backwards. I can't make it go forward any faster than it seems to be doing. If in fact, time is its own concept. I don't know if it's a fourth dimension or what, but so if we were fast forward, and let's say the Netherlands is a Islam majority country. Has anyone figured out what would be the rights? Let's just, I mean, it would change, and there are many variables and so forth. But if we took, say, some of the precepts that you might find in, say, Turkey, and applied them to the Netherlands, would overall the new minority of previously, ancestrally Dutch be happy with that? Do they anticipate that? Do the people not on the quote unquote far right, which I always find, people don't really say far, extreme left, extreme, far left, but, so I think the right somewhat gets, labeled, but, you can't necessarily bring up these ideas, so is multiculturalism in a sense, its own causation and its own termination?
I don't know. I don't really understand your question.
Well, okay. So the question is: we fast forward, and we're in a majority Islamic Netherlands. Will these issues of tolerance? If we took, say, the essence of, say, Turkish, the Turkish, Erdogan, if one of his congeners were the new leader of the Netherlands, and then let's say it's parliamentary, and then there are new edicts, new laws.
Yeah.
I'm just assuming that we wouldn't have this kind of, open sexuality tolerance, and so multicultural, it wouldn't necessarily have the same theme of kumbaya, nicey, multiculturalism, and it would bring about its own end. So is multiculturalism self-terminating? I guess is the question, and do people anticipate that, and is that a reasonable point of departure to question?
I see what you mean. So first of all, I think it's important to realize that it's not a realistic scenario in Holland that the Muslim minority takes over or becomes bigger than the white majority. What we do see is that overall we have, especially in the cities, I think of the Dutch, when it comes to youth under 25, I think 40% of the Dutch youth is white. It's still the biggest group, but it's not the majority anymore. And the other 60% is people from there's over 120 nationalities in Amsterdam. It's extremely diverse. And then the biggest groups are Surinamese and Antillean and Dutch and Dutch Moroccan, Dutch Turkish. So there's a vast portions of other groups. But I think what important is that even if there is minority groups, this is something that I've also learned from woke, because the woke fanatics at the University of Amsterdam, it's a small group. It's not a minority, but it takes a small group. Fanatics can take in small groups. They can take over the house. Yeah. So I think there is a very concrete risk that the whole concept of multiculturalism can implode. Basically, it can implode itself. So by opening up, there's often this accusation of Holland from the right saying you are so obsessed with being tolerant that you're now so too tolerant because you get in people who hate you and you allow them and you accept them and they don't accept you.
Yeah, there's an old joke that certain people, typically on the left, have such an open mind that their mind is so open that some of their brains have fallen out.
This is absolutely true. Yeah, and I also come from that. So there is a huge trap from the progressive left that we have this dreamy vision of a multicultural society that somehow magically by itself all these differences integrate into a fantastic salad, a meal that combines everything beautifully.
Right. It's very naive. A melting pot, and now turned into a salad.
A melting pot.
So I was listening to this short little clip. I think it was Christine Amanpour, who's on CNN.
Yeah,
I think she's from Iran originally, and she was interviewing one of the, I'm not sure what level in the government, Hungarian leader, and she was saying, your country is, is allowing, Christians to come in, but not other faiths. Aren't you breaking with multiculturalism? And he said, well, I mean, I'm going to just distill what he said, not specifically, but this is our culture. I mean, in order to respect multiculturalism, why don't you respect ours? And certainly, it's always shallow to me that these culture wars take place on open turf. Nobody is really demonstrating for women's rights and freedoms. I mean, the true feminists are not, stampeding every day or demonstrating in front of, the Iran consulate or embassy or Saudi or that, organizing marches in those places. And similarly, and they're not saying, oh, Somalia has to be a place where Dutch can live. I mean, I'm not sure they want to go there, but it always seems to be a one-way thing. Like, what's mine is mine, what's yours is mine.
Yeah.
And Islam typically, traveled by the sword or the scimitar, and there have been mass conversions over time. I mean, I'm sure the Netherlands had a long experience in Indonesia. I'm not sure how much of you are on the history of Islam, moving into Indonesia, but these things come, things to come little by little, but then all at once. And I'm wondering, I don't know, that's not really a question. I don't know if you want to talk to any of those topics I mentioned.
I think it's you mentioned a lot of interesting things. So for me, it is basically we should have a wake-up call, especially this is all every time I point towards the left, especially when you are interested in these left-wing values of having space for minorities, a multicultural society, where also there's space for Dutch tolerance, especially if your concern is there, then it's now time to lose naivety, and to really
lose your naivete.
Yes, and to understand that this is something under pressure and we need to fight for it. And it's really, we should not be naive about the intentions of other people. And we should also, I think it's important to realize that it's not a bad thing to say, we are a nation state with some form of nationalism and some form of pride, and we demand from people that come here that this is our house. And you are welcome here, but under our terms. You should not be too shy to take that position, because now when you do, when I say these kinds of things in left-wing progressive circles, then you're so often accused of being, oh, you're so nationalist, you're so authoritarian, this is not the right energy. Yeah, so this naivety is just too big. Yeah? And I think we need to address that and be brave. Be brave, especially when you're concerned with multicultural society. This is now the moment to stand up and to say, yes, let's try to have it, but under our conditions.
Right. So again, this is kind of like this, almost like a no theater, or those puppets, getting back to Indonesia, kind of puppet theater. Those who might say what you're saying, but from Islam, are, well, from either side. I mean, there's the Charlie Hebdo situation in Paris, where they had a Muslim, Muhammad cartoon contest, and they, I think, suffered through multiple different attacks, and I think varying success, and there were murders as a result. And then we're all familiar with Salman Rushdie, his Satanic Verses book and so forth. And then eventually, I mean, he was living clandestinely for decades. Yes. It's hard. There are stakes. I mean, this is not just a culture war; it's a culture war, and I'm not sure necessarily everybody's engaged or understanding about it. I have many friends who are from Morocco and Pakistan, and they're here in the United States, and I don't think they want Pakistan to be the United States. I don't think they are the United States to be Pakistan, or the United States to be any of the places they left. And I think I would imagine there's some similarity. I'm not sure. There's chain migration. It's hard to attribute motives to people who come over when they're 5 years old and whatnot. But a lot of people, I assume, are economic migrants. They're voting with their wallets, they're voting with their feet, they're leaving turmoil, they're leaving wars, they're leaving instability. And the question is whether the seeds of new instability are being sown right now. There's the question of tolerance, and then I think there's some limitations about how tolerant people can be. When you're getting to some of the gender things, when in the United States right now, there are clandestine, there's quiet, say, conversions in the sense of young people, being able to have their converse gender name. So if I come in as George to school, the teachers, might have sussed out that I want to be Georgina, and they're going to have a new name for me, or Georgette, whatever. And there's in a sense grooming, not in the same prostitution sense, but there's a sense grooming going on, and I'm using that term very loosely, of people's minds. And so the culture war is happening with our own children. And we care about our community, we care about our country, we care, but children is what we care about most. That is, our essence. Those are individuals that we who literally suckled from our bodies and came out of our bodies and from our bodies and are part of us. And to have them threatened before they could say legally get a tattoo or legally buy a vacuum cleaner or whatever, or have a credit card, but somehow be on a pathway, either physically or essentially philosophically, to be self-mutilating and or making irreversible decisions at young ages. So the tolerance, there's an old expression, that your right to wave your hands ends at my nose. And so it seems to me as if there's a fair amount of freedom going on, but these freedoms, they are not all mutually capable.
Right. So when it comes to this whole, my response would be that I have seen that I have started to realize that a lot of these processes that you describe, we also have here in our schools, so that we facilitate all sorts of. And again, I'm a pro-LGBTI, I'm an ally, but we facilitate all sorts of very radical and over-the-top acceptance and even promotion of letting go of your gender identity to become non-binary, to become trans, queer, gender fluid at a very young age. And what always strikes me when I see it, I think it's important to realize that this mechanism is that it works through virtues. So these people that propagate the system genuinely think that they are good people who are progressive, who are opening space for people with different backgrounds and different gender diversity. And so there is this, this is, I think, in general, very important about the current zeitgeist and about the current authoritarian power grab that is going on throughout the world. It dresses up in good virtues. We have seen it in COVID. All the measures presented themselves as we protect the elderly, and we are the solidarity with the vulnerable. And now we see with this whole gender power grab that now even involves vulnerable children, and we are reckless in doing so. But it presents itself as, oh, we are opening up space for gender diversity and gender fluidity. So, and these people genuinely believe that they are doing good work. So my point is there is a lot of ego going on. Apparently, in a lot of these woke ideologies, I also see it as a sort of a mind virus that goes around in universities, but it spreads outside into Dutch society. And there is this virtue calling that we are good people, progressive people doing it, and people are basically worshipping their own ego, because look at me being so free and so open and so tolerant. So I think it's very important to stop all this, that we come to an awareness of that. And I'm also very much interested into Jungian psychology, and I think what is now so necessary is what he calls shadow work, that we start to understand, we look into the mirror and start to understand that a lot of our well-intended behavior and ideologies are in fact evil, and we have to recognize it. Because when we when we keep on believing in this myth that we are good people, progressive people, I think this is now where the totalitarian risk comes from. It's not from an overt criminal guy like Hitler or Stalin, who is very
Well, they
obvious.
were pretty good at it. I mean, to be fair, they were good at it themselves. But I think that there are, people tend to think that it's all outside. It's only these kind of historical figures that do that stuff. I don't think they
Yeah.
understand the essence of fascism.
Yes, that it
Over
comes, that
the
it's
past
part of
50
yourself. That it's part of yourself, and this is also what I've been. Why I got so much heat from the university. I tried to give this mirror to my colleagues and also to my students. Like, look at yourself in the mirror. How far away is fascism? They are so quick to point to the far right and to Russia and to other countries that are wrong, but they don't recognize it within themselves. And I think we have to start to see a little bit of the sports of that also, to make it a little bit fun and to remove the taboo. Oh, listen, how can I discover my own little fascist within me? I
Mhm.
try to do these exercises with my students. If you present it well, as an opportunity for personal growth and for more understanding of your own persona and to give more depth to your life, then students are willing to do it. Young people are willing to do it, but nobody offers it to them. Yeah? So we have to put mirrors in front of this seemingly
Right,
progressive good mensch ideology. Yeah.
right. So I heard recently that COVID was a worldwide Milgram experiment. Are you familiar with the Milgram experiment?
Yes, I have.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's a sidelight. But the point my ears kind of perked up when you talk about evil. You mentioned you're an atheist. What is
I
evil?
used to be. I'm not anymore. I used to be. I was brought up like that. Yeah.
Okay, so that was a point of clarification. So maybe
Yeah.
I'd like to kind of round out the hour with your telling us a little bit about your journey, where you've been, where you stand now in terms of academic freedom. Have you found acolytes, apostles to your interests, and where does this all take us?
So basically, what I am very happy with is that I broke out with a lot of force out of the academic institution. I published an opinion piece. I went into the Dutch national press. I got a lot of heat. People tried to scapegoat me, also from within the university. People tried to, that's always what people do when somebody has an uncomfortable message. They
Mhm.
try to disqualify the person. So people try to disqualify me as that I got insane, that I lost my mind, that my mental health is broken, that I'm overestimated, that I'm attacking a vulnerable left wing institution in the right wing Holland, and that I am basically, yeah, having an evil pact with the far right to destroy a temple of diversity. So all these weird attacks have been going on to my person. It was a very difficult 2 weeks that I had, the past 2 weeks. At the same time, what I did see happen is that also some people high up in the institution of the UvA, not so much publicly but privately, stood up, went to the board, reached out to the university saying, listen, he is not a lunatic. We want him to be taken seriously. And as a result, the university, the board of the university, has now hired an independent research committee of 3 high-ranking professors in Holland coming from different universities. So it's an external committee, and they've gotten quite some power now to do research. They will publish their research in June, and they will research my claims. So, is woke culture now in the University of Amsterdam in the social science department threatening academic freedom and the quality of education and research? If they confirm my concerns, that means that it becomes harder and harder to put it all on me as a person, and to blame me as a person and to scapegoat me. Then
Mhm.
suddenly it will be a committee that confirms my concerns. And then I think the university will be forced to do something against it. This is my hope, that now I force, it was not easy, but in this whistleblower procedure, I can really recommend it. If there's a similar procedure in other people's countries, at least in Holland, as a whistleblower, you have some legal protection. They cannot just fire you and get rid of you, and they actually have to act on the concerns that you bring forward. I also needed some media attention, so that really helps for the university to really protect me as a whistleblower.
Mhm.
But I found it an interesting journey, and I hope that yeah, that this path of being a whistleblower and trying to stop the collapse of our academic freedom will pay out.
Well, that's awesome. Um, I I'm really very impressed. I just wanted to thank you for your time today. If people want to contact you or help you in any way, how can they do that?
So they can reach out to me. I have a website. There's also some English language text on there about what's going on. My
Hmm.
website is laurensbuijs.org.
Hmm.
Laurens is my first name, and my last name is Buijs.
Yeah, I'm
And
going to
that
try to pull
together,
that up.
yeah, that together is my website. And so people, yeah, if you recognize some of my concerns, if you have similar struggles in your own institutions, please reach out. I've been in touch with colleagues from throughout the Netherlands and also in international institutions. And I think we really have to combine forces to protect our universities from the falling free word.
Hmm. Okay, so let me just see if I can pop this up here. Um, so
Yeah,
that's your web page there,
that's it.
and I'm very much in your debt for having come on. Um, probably we could go another hour with
Oh,
no
good, I'd love
problem.
to.
I like to I popped this up very briefly, but this is my shameless self promotion here. I have a book out, Overturning Zika, the Pandemic
Excellent.
That Never Was. It's being published in Brazil in the next couple of weeks. There's a Portuguese version. It's on Amazon. You can, not you, other people can buy it. And it's I don't think it necessarily has much intersection per se with what we've discussed here today, except for the fact that within academic circles there is kind of a closed loop. Once money is there for the Zika industry, nobody seems to ever want to talk about the weak underpinnings of the theory, the fact that it never recurred after 2015 in
Right.
Brazil, if in fact it was there in 2015 in Brazil at all. And so what I always thought of as science is a lot of times, kind of like a monastery or a religion or a sect. And I think that we see a fair amount of this across the board, that these institutions that we thought were, purely into inquiry and following where those thoughts are not necessarily that case. And, I think a lot of people actually probably have a different view towards religion. This is a whole nother day and topic, as, perhaps the way, when we are freed by God to think our thoughts, we don't necessarily worry about the opinions of man as much. Anyway, so I don't want to, go all deep in proselytizing here, but that's a thought that I think people, I think, if you remember Eric Bonhoeffer. Um, are you familiar with the story of Bonhoeffer? So he was a minister in Germany during the war, and he has some qualities. I think you should read. There's a book by Eric Metaxas called Bonhoeffer,
Mhm.
and I think it's a book that you might enjoy because it's a man who has his convictions, and then he has his convictions. In the other sense of the word, he has his own personal convictions. Then the government convicts him, and
Mm.
he's a martyr. He dies, but he needed to expose some of the literal fascist, totalitarian, cruel, evil, genocidal aspects of Nazi Germany.
Mm.
But the miracle is that in man's soul there is this essence of truth, and there is kind of an essence of where we need to be and how we measure ourselves. And so I think that's the real message of the Lawrence Buijs story. And I hope people come to read your work and promote you and have you speak and so forth. So anyway, I am very much honored to have been here with you. I've learned a lot, and I wish you all the power and strength that you need to carry forth.
Thank you so much, Randall, also for inviting me to your great platform. Thank you so much.
All right. So you can hang around. We'll chat for a second, but we're going to say goodbye to everybody else.
Yes.
Bye bye.